you all hear me? Okay, so I'm going to give a brief introduction to some of the tools that we have available for developers to develop applications against the services that Globus provides. Somebody at one of the or at Bridget's tutorial set up the sort of perfect introduction and asked if there are APIs available for accessing Globus. Should I step back? We do. We have lots of APIs. Basically, everything that you can do in the Globus web app, anything that you can do from the Globus CLI is all accessible programmatically through REST APIs. We have REST APIs for all our major service groups, so auth groups, transfer, Globus search, timers, flows, GCS, and recently we've added Globus compute. All of that is available and documented at docs.globus.org/API. So if you go there, you can check out REST API documentation. You can see what the endpoints are, what the routes are to access those methods that they support. And additionally, all of that is available through our Python SDK. So if you're developing in Python, you can use the Python SDK. You can access well-defined client classes that expose most of the functionality provided by the APIs directly as methods on those clients. Additionally, though, as we add features, we generally add them to the APIs first, and the Globus SDK actually supports direct access to the underlying sort of requests object. So if you're familiar with Python requests library, you can use that to access anything that may not yet be in the SDK. So it's a very flexible library to basically provide you access to all of Globus functionality from a sort of single import. I want to spend a little bit of time talking through the sort of foundational pieces for interacting with Globus services through either the REST API or the SDK. And one of the things that you're going to probably encounter first when you end up developing against Globus is Globus Auth, which is our identity and access management service. Basically, this is what provides the mapping between various external federated identity providers and the Globus users and identities that we use within Globus for access control. I think Bridget mentioned we have close to 2,000 identity providers that are integrated with that. So that any of those providers you can use in an application you build against the Globus REST APIs. We allow for linking of other identities. We do the work to maintain connectivity to those identity providers. And those are all, we provide some nice tooling within the SDK to basically simplify authenticating users as much as we can. Auth is never simple, but it's we try to keep it as simple as possible. So we want to go over a couple sort of fundamental concepts that we have with Globus Auth, and that we'll run into, and that will come up as we talk through using Globus Auth. First is an identity. An identity is basically a user account. So anything that you do against Globus is going to have some identity associated with it. So anytime you access transfer API, anytime you access search API or compute API, that is being that access is going to be done as some user, some identity. The thing that is doing the accessing, the application that you develop, your local SDK installation, your CLI, The web app, if you build a web app, your own web app, our own web app uses has a client. These are all clients, and so every access to any of the Globus resources is accessed by that client on behalf of some identity. And the resource server is the thing that is being accessed. So with Globus, we have our various REST APIs. Each one of those has or is a resource server. And so whenever you use an application to access that, that resource server, you'll be put through an authentication workflow. You'll come back with some token to identify both the client and the identity that is making a request to that resource server. And resource servers each have some set of scopes attached to them, and scopes provide some limited access to functionality of that resource server. So whenever a user is put through an authentication flow, they log in, they'll be asked to consent, basically provide authorization on behalf of that user to allow the client, the application that they're using, to access a particular resource server or subset of resources on that resource server. So that's kind of the high level vocabulary that I wanted to make sure that we understand before going on. And so there are a handful of ways that people might use these authentication tools to build applications. So one example is that you might build sort of a portal or a science gateway or some application that you're hosting, a web portal that a user might go to and wants to access Globus resources on behalf of that web portal. In that case, the client is the web portal itself. The user can be put through a login flow for that web portal and come back with basically access granted to that web portal to say start a transfer on their behalf or to access a flow on their behalf or any of the various things that you can do against Globus services. Another sort of use case that you might you'll see is sort of a command line client or a thick client, a desktop application or a mobile application. This is also SPAs sort of fall into this mode as well as single page applications. You'll sometimes hear us refer to those as native apps. The sort of mode of using OAuth was originally sort of identified for native applications like an Android or iPhone application. A third sort of kind of client that you might use is a service account or what we sometimes call application credentials or client credentials. And so this kind of client is something that may be operating in a service account, say a cron job that runs a file transfer or that starts a flow or you know, a local file watching script that kicks off a flow whenever a file changes. Those would be basically these service accounts, and they don't operate on behalf of any end user, but they have an identity that is themselves. So they have their own set of sort of client ID and secret, and they get an identity within Globus ecosystem that identifies that service as doing something on its own behalf. And so you can use that. Greg showed setting up ACLs. You can grant ACLs to a identity, client identity. You can grant group access to a client identity and basically give a specific sort of offline or long-lived task access to some features of Globus ecosystem. Want to briefly switch here and show one of the sort of newer things that web app team has built out in the Auth team. is we now have sort of a nice little wizard set up where you can basically pick which one of these things you want to, which one of these use cases you're going to use. You can say that you want to register a application credential or client credentials, and it will walk you through the process of doing that. You can set up a project to do that under, and ask you to authenticate to make sure that you're in session. We go through the auth flow, and takes you to a nice form to set that up, and sort of simplifies that whole process. So if you are not sure what you need to be creating here in order to program against our APIs, that is a easy way to do it. So there are a lot of different things you might try to build with Globus. Just going to give a few examples here. We have, you can build a portal, what we have termed sort of a science gateway, where you can integrate search and data access. We have Jupyter Hub integration, so you can set up authentication within a Jupyter notebook. And you can set up CLIs or sort of virtually anything that you're seeing in the Globus ecosystem. We can develop and build against our APIs. Again, here's sort of some of the service account use cases that talk through with sort of periodic transfers or backups. One thing to notice is that as I'm talking about client credentials, you will see sometimes a client ID, which is a UUID, a long string, at clients.auth.globus.org. So if you see any user in our ecosystem and our ACLs that have that format, that at clients.auth.globus.org, that is a client identity and represents some service account or some offline script or program. We have a handful of examples online as well that I want to point you to a few places where you can take a look at some of these examples. So we've got this automation examples GitHub location. And one of the examples there, we have this shared data.py. We have a handful of other examples there, but if you're ever curious about how to do a particular thing, you can take a look there and get some ideas. I'm going to take a moment also and walk through a couple examples of using the SDK directly from our Jupyter notebook. If you go to jupyter.demo.globus.org, you can log in with Globus credentials and follow along if you're interested. Take a moment and switch over to that. Okay, so that booted up, and now we've got, there are a couple of notebooks in here under Globus Jupyter Notebooks, but you've got the platform introduction for Jupyter Hub, and that's what we're going to fire up. I'm actually going to do the one for native app. The Jupyter Hub integration is interesting. It demonstrates using Jupyter Hub credentials. That's pretty cool and a neat use case. But probably somewhat more commonly, you're going to end up using a command line script, or you're building out something that you want to run just from the CLI. So I'm going to demonstrate using this with sort of what we call our native app auth flow. What we've done is we started out with just finding some interesting variables and doing some imports. We have a few tutorial endpoints that we use for well, tutorials like this one. But the more interesting code is actually here in the Oh, yes, sorry. I'm close. I can see it just fine. Uh, so we start out doing a couple of things here. One is that we define our client ID. And so when we go through this registration process that I started walking us through, sort of the next thing after this is we would end up creating a client, and we would get a client UUID. And we conveniently have this little copy button, so you can grab that UUID, paste it into your Jupyter notebook. I'm going to go ahead and use the one that we've already created. The next thing that we do is we create the, after importing the Globus SDK, so obviously I have to import the SDK in order to use it, is we create a native app auth client. And so this is an application designed to be run in a CLI or someplace that doesn't have a place to store client secrets. So it's a client that has no credentials of its own. And the next thing that we do is we hit this auth to start flow. That start flow command basically prints out this URL, and this URL will direct you to our authentication service. You can log in at our authentication service. I'm actually already logged in, so you don't get to see the login page, but I'm going to creatively name this demo, and it will give me an basically a native app authorization code. So I can select that, copy that, and then go back to our demo here. And I'm just going to paste that code where it very helpfully says, paste the code. Maybe. There we go. Not as good at one-handed typing as I thought I was. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to call this Auth to exchange code for tokens. It's going to get a set of tokens back from our authentication service. And those tokens will basically allow you to do whatever it is that you wanted to do. One thing that is that I kind of glossed over up here is that we will, there are sets of scopes that you can ask. And there are some default ones that we include in the request. But among those is a token for or the scope for our transfer service. So the sort of next thing that we do is we grab that token from the token response, specifically the one for our transfer service. And now we have a transfer access token. Once we have that access token, we create what's called an access token authorizer. And so this is what's responsible for basically putting the authorization headers into every request to our REST API. So anytime you hit the transfer API, the SDK will automatically drop that header into the request, and transfer knows who's making the call, on whose behalf, and is able to authorize access accordingly. And then finally, we are going to go ahead and just create this transfer client. So once I've executed that, now I have a transfer client that's stored in this TC variable. And our SDK is very helpful and very well documented. You can check out the help on any method. So for example, get endpoint. This gets information about a particular endpoint. And it also has links to, for most of the methods in most clients, links to our online documentation as well. So you can go ahead and just click that link. You can see what documentation is there, read about what payload it requires, what the responses are. And we have this available for basically all of our APIs. So you can check out flows, auth, compute, everything is there. So that gives you a little bit of information about how to use the client. Obviously, to use the client, we need to execute that method, and executing that method is fairly straightforward. We're just going to pass in this tutorial endpoint ID that we already set up at the top of the tutorial, and we'll go ahead and run that. And so we get some information back about it. Obviously, success, 200, useful information. And then we've got our display name, as well as some metadata about the endpoint itself. It's a host name is ep1.transfer.globus.org, IDs, whatever you need to know about it, and a whole bunch of details that are, in this case, don't necessarily apply. So S3 owner, S3 URL, it's not an S3 endpoint, so those are not populated. And then real quickly, just to sort of complete this a little bit, we want to do, we can do things and search for specific endpoints. So here, this is going to pull up endpoints that I have access to or that I own. And so you see, I've got a few of them, my laptop, machine that I have at home, and a couple of guest collections for demos that I've done in the past. And all of this, we also have nice error handling, and I'm going to gloss over a little bit of this here so that you can get the rest of the presentation in, but you can get error codes, you can get all that stuff. And we have clients written for basically all of our major services. I'm going to go back to the presentation real quick, and wanted to highlight basically a couple of other resources that we have. So I had mentioned this GitHub automation examples repository, and there are a few other things. And again, copy and pasting one-handed. So there are a few things in there that are probably good examples of things to play with. Plus, we have a bunch of links to some recipes, examples for the client credentials grant and whatnot. Beyond that, we also have our SDK documentation, which besides being a good resource for individual SDK calls, has a really nice tutorial section. So you can go and check that out, and I'll walk you through creating clients. I'll walk you through authenticating through various versions of the OAuth flow. So you can check out the native flow, which I just showed, but also talks through the three-legged OAuth flow, which you will use for a data science portal or for a web application that you're building. So definitely, I would recommend that as a really good starting point and jumping off point. And the last thing that I would like to point us to is there's a couple things. There's a YouTube channel. You can check that out. Really good tutorials that the sales team has put together for demoing Globus. And then we also have, if you are curious about building a research portal, we have this our modern data research documentation. I think I had actually opened up already in another tab, and maybe not. So here we have examples. We have a GitHub repository with a Django app that you can take a look at as an example of how to build an application. Additionally, we've got an example portal online, a nice little code walkthrough to explain what exactly is happening with the data portal functionality. And then we also have a Jupyter notebook with some of the same information in it. Lastly, before I wrap up, I want to point out we're going to be doing deep dives and office hours tomorrow at the end of the day, and we'll have people from all of our various product teams available to answer questions about individual REST APIs and how to access particular functionality within Globus. And I think that's most of what I have for you guys. Open it up for any questions.